Comings and goings. Just try to keep up. We're trying to ourselves. So you can help us. We can help you. It's Oklahoma football. It's college football. The state of the game in 2021/22. Oklahoma Sooners live on a Friday here. So please leave your comments and questions in the live chat. We will get to as many as possible as we discuss the Sooners. Got Jason Ray, of course, on the line from Last Word on College Football. Jason, I know you're under the weather, but getting better.
Yeah, definitely getting better. Thanks and apologize for having to move this, everybody. But I wasn't feeling quite up to it on Wednesday, but much better now. And yeah, Mark, as you mentioned, I think it's gonna be pretty fast and furious between now and almost during until spring practice with the number of transfers that Oklahoma's on, and then certainly the second, the late signing period for the recruiting cycle for 2022 as well.
Absolutely. So once again, everybody, leave your comments and questions, and we're going to get through the news. And it starts on the coaching staff. LaDamian Washington, just recently a college football and XFL player, signed as an off-field analyst. He had been wide receiver coach at Southern. But in addition to that, of course, Jay Valai, the defensive backs coach, coming in from Alabama, certainly seems to be a top flight addition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the one thing, Mark, that was very appealing for Oklahoma and Jay Valai was his inroads in Texas. You know, he was at Texas a couple of years ago, part of Tom Herman's staff on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, was let go when when Sark took over. Has some NFL experience as well. Went over to obviously last year went over to Alabama, and I think from my perspective, if you're good enough for Saban, you're good enough for me type of situation. So yeah, I think and the one thing to keep in mind, Mark, is this is something that I think we talked a little bit about last week, but with and this is just on the defensive side of the ball, not even really talking about offensively. And you kind of put Venables into that defensive side, even though obviously he's the head coach. But the previous staff at Oklahoma, that majority of that defensive staff went with Riley to Southern Cal. But the new defensive staff at Oklahoma has 7 national championships that they've won within that group, and the old staff doesn't have any. So I think I think fans will be absolutely thrilled to see who Oklahoma have and knows those guys, but knows them by reputation. But I think on the field, as this this new season starts kicking off a little bit, I think it'll be very interesting to see how quickly they can get those guys up to the standard that Oklahoma needs them to be. But I think with the addition of Todd Bates, obviously on the defensive line, with the addition of Valai on the back end, and then everything that Venables brings on the defensive side, I think the future is bright, certainly on the defensive side of the ball as well.
And while that in no way guarantees a national championship, I think some people tend to credit national championships to the head coach. The head coach, we can count them up. We can all say this person is this many and this person is this many. And there's only, I think, 5 active coaches that have national championships. And then, of course, the players, they were on the field, they won them, and give them credit, but kind of lost in the shuffle, especially if they weren't coordinators. The assistants that contributed to that national championship. And when you put together a staff that has 7 national championships, those guys were integral parts of coaching and developing those national championship teams, and certainly have seen the process and what it takes to win a national championship. And I got to think that knowledge, that experience, and having accomplished it is extremely valuable.
No, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think it'll be interesting to see the dynamics of the defensive staff, because it's very maybe I don't know the word to say. I don't know that I've seen this a lot, just in terms of how these coordinators have been named. So obviously Ted Roof has been named the defensive coordinator. uh, Brandon Hall, who's a co-defensive coordinator. Todd Bates is a co-defensive coordinator. Jay Valai has been brought on as a co-defensive coordinator as well. So they've got a defensive coordinator in title and Ted Roof, and then they've got three co-defensive coordinators. I mean, I think the way that they're probably positioning this is there's these three or four different guys that have a different area of focus, obviously, in the game planning of the and then probably Ted Roof or more so Venables probably has more say in terms of kind of the play calling. But I think that dynamic is going to be really interesting, Mark, to see what that looks like, because you've got three or four guys who have been defensive coordinators on their own in the past. So I think looking at what that dynamic looks like, and to your point, Mark, Oklahoma's they've had a lot of success other places, and are they able to bring that success over to Oklahoma, which is it's not a rebuild, but I think it's a um, I don't know the right word to say. It's just just kind of going back to the basics type of situation and see uh, is it the talent? Because Oklahoma has been able to bring a lot of talent. They've upgraded the talent on the defensive side of the ball over the last few years under Alex Grinch. So is talent an issue, or was it more so on the coaching side? So I think that on top of the kind of the increased strength and conditioning program that Jerry Schmidt will bring to Oklahoma will be interesting to see how that translates to the field.
Oklahoma Sooners Live each and every Wednesday is our typical time at 11:30 a.m. Central for anyone who may be catching us for a first or second time. So let your friends and family know that are Oklahoma fans, but all college football fans, of course, welcome. And we appreciate everyone who subscribes here and has that bell turned on for the notifications. And that way you were able to catch us live on this fine Friday. All right. Jason, I almost liken where we are with college football player acquisition to the NFL in this way. With the NFL, you've got the draft. That's the heart and soul and the lifeblood of building an NFL roster, but you also have free agency.
Mm-hmm.
And so now and you see various analysts giving out NFL draft grades that don't deal with free agency. So the team could have a great draft, but pick up nobody significant in free agency, or they could have a marginal draft by everyone's standards and evaluations and, pick up a boatload of talent through free agency. Likewise, now with college football, we've got a recruiting ranking that used to be everything. You looked at the recruiting ranking, okay, 2022, Oklahoma's number 10 in the country. And until proven otherwise, it was generally believed that's probably about where that recruiting class was going to sit and produce on the field. Well, now we've got almost a free agency component, just like the NFL, where in the transfer portal, said team could be picking up significant contributions through the transfer portal or not necessarily much contribution and be losing a ton. And so that has to be evaluated as well in terms of the rise or fall of that particular team from season to season. So it's kind of where we stand with college football and Oklahoma in particular. You kind of slapped me upside the head with a tremendous number here of hosting 9 transfers here in the next few days.
Yeah, so it's kind of spanned through the week and into the weekend, Mark, that Oklahoma's hosting about 9 guys that they feel strongly about coming into this to the spring schedule. So there's no real in the true meaning of the word free agency. There's no real deadline from a spring perspective when these kids have to be enrolled. Obviously, they have to be enrolled to participate in spring practice. But the idea is that a lot of these kids want to be on campus. Starting to kind of go through some of these off-season workouts and be with their teammates. So yeah, Oklahoma has 9 um, on campus, and I'll through like I said through earlier this week through Sunday. So I'll go through those. There's one of which who's probably not going to be with Oklahoma. Chuba Purdy, who is a brother, who's the brother of Brock Purdy, who visited Oklahoma earlier this weekend. Now it looks like he's Nebraska bound. He's actually already in the student database. No one's actually he hasn't actually come out and said this yet, but I've seen from several sources that he's there in the Nebraska database. So I think that's really where he's at. So I think the biggest guy that's actually in Norman right now is Jackson Dart, so quarterback from USC who's transferred, and it looks like it's between right now. I think Oklahoma and Ole Miss are the two leaders, and I think from some of the things that I've been seeing, it looks like Oklahoma might be in a little bit of a lead right now. So it's him and Michael Trigg. Michael Trigg is the tight end from USC as well. So it looks like they might be a package deal for Oklahoma. So if that's possible, and I think these things are going to be moving fairly quickly early in the next week. I would assume, just because of the fact that they they were Oklahoma's spring semester starts on Monday or Tuesday with Martin Luther King Jr. Day. But I think that's going to be interesting to see how quickly that moves. So it's absolutely not a done deal. I've even seen some commentary that an Ole Miss visit that was scheduled for Saturday, Sunday might not even happen at this point. So I think Oklahoma's in good spot right there with the Dart and Trigg combination. A couple of other guys from a defensive back perspective that I would be a little bit surprised if Oklahoma doesn't land these two. C.J. Colden, who is a defensive back out of the University of Wyoming, and then Trey Morrison, who is another defensive back out of North Carolina. So Colden has been at Wyoming for a couple of years. I think this will be. I think he'll be either a sophomore or junior if he comes to Oklahoma. He really hasn't scheduled any other visits besides Oklahoma, so I think that's what really kind of leads me to believe that he is very strongly on the Oklahoma side. Trey Morrison, again, I think from everything that I've heard, he's a senior. This will be his final season in college. I think Morrison, again, he's along the same lines of Colden that looks like could be potentially headed towards Oklahoma. So really good. It's going to be really good for Oklahoma to get a couple of guys on the defensive backfield. Latrell McCutcheon had announced his intentions at the transfer portal earlier this week, so that brings in a little bit more for Oklahoma in the defensive back area. So a couple of other guys that Oklahoma's in on the defensive line. Jeffrey Johnson, who is a defensive lineman from the University of Tulane. Played Oklahoma, was very, very impressive against Oklahoma this year, and where he went he's already visited Oklahoma. Was very pro Oklahoma on his visit, and then through social media. So I don't know what other visits. He's got a lot of big time offers, at the high blue blood level as well. So another defensive lineman, Makai Wingo from Missouri, is going to be visiting later on this weekend as well. So don't have a lot of intel just in terms of where he's leaning right there. So he could be a little bit of a wild card. But outside of the Dart and Trigg, maybe the most exciting guy that's going to be visiting, and I've heard that's going to be either in today or tomorrow, is Drew Sanders. Drew Sanders is a linebacker out of Alabama, probably one of the best portal guys. You know, that's there from the defensive side of the ball. Originally committed to Oklahoma, in his cycle, decided to go to Alabama, played a decent amount for the Crimson Tide this year. Again, I hear that from what I'm hearing, that's Oklahoma, that's Texas, and that's Arkansas. I think Oklahoma has a leg up, just in terms of I think what Venables brings to the defensive side of the ball is and we'll see. This kind of remains to be seen, Mark. But I think that's bringing a little bit more credence to where he wants to be. I think Oklahoma leads for him. I don't know that I wouldn't say it's, again, a foregone conclusion, but right now I would probably say maybe 60-40, 70-30 in favor of Oklahoma right now, based on just based on his previous commitment to Oklahoma, and just the staff that Oklahoma has in place there.
All right. So to run this down, player by player, Oklahoma's picking up a wealth of experience if they get these guys. So first and foremost, you got Drew Sanders. He actually is the least experienced of them, but in regards to top end talent, wow. Third rated player in the state of Texas in 2020, top rated athlete, top 20, 25 player nationally. And he got on the field and played quite a bit, as Jason mentioned, with Alabama this past season. 7 games, 24 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. And obviously wasn't seeing the type of playing time that you would expect a 5-star to receive. The rest of these guys have a wealth of experience, the least of which would be the Missouri player, Mekhi Wingo, although he did play in 9 games this past season. 27 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, and a sack. He also had a pick 6 as well. Jeffrey Morrison Jeffrey Johnson, first and foremost, will hit him, the defensive tackle at Tulane. Not that you can really lean on numbers, especially at D tackle, but he's played in 42 games at Tulane. So he's been a starter since he was a freshman at nose tackle. Mm-hmm. and is producing. This past season, 44 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, and 2.5 sacks. He has 10 career sacks at Tulane. Then you've got the North Carolina defensive back, Trey Morrison, with 47 tackles this past year with 2 tackles for loss. He has a couple career picks, and he's played 44 games at North Carolina. Then you also mentioned C.J. Colden out of Wyoming. He played 13 games, so the full schedule plus the bowl game for Wyoming this past year, had 67 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and a sack. And he's got 2 career interceptions, and he's played 25 career games as well. And Michael Triggs, a guy that played some tight end at USC, caught 7 passes this past year. And then we come to, of course, Jackson Dart. The story on Jackson Dart was he was not a player that was that highly regarded as a quarterback playing in Utah as a high school quarterback until his senior season. And then he just took off and became a guy that was much coveted and went to all the elite camps and impressed, and again had a breakout senior season, recruited and signed at USC. Keaton Slovis, starting quarterback there at USC, was hurt at one point in the season. About halfway through the season, Jackson Dart took over, and even when Slovis was ready to go, Dart maintained the job through 9 touchdowns with 5 picks, 62% completion percentage, about 1,300 yards for Jackson Dart, which brings us to Jackson Dart, Dillon Gabriel. Quarterbacks are looking for the clear-cut opportunity. And it seems like you believe that Jackson Dart's leaning Oklahoma, but of course that would set up quite the quarterback battle between Dillon Gabriel and Jackson Dart.
It would. I think it would be if that comes to fruition. And I think, the one thing to keep in mind with this, Mark, is, things change. You could come to campus, or it could, I don't know how this kid feels about the competition side. I think based on what Dillon and based on what Ole Miss has coming back, maybe that's a better spot for him to feel like he can start immediately. But if he does end up coming to Oklahoma, I think it'll probably be the biggest quarterback battle that Oklahoma's had coming into the spring, and obviously in through the fall. than they've had in quite some time. Probably the biggest one that comes to mind would have been the initial season that Baker Mayfield was eligible, when Baker Mayfield and Trevor Knight, battled it out there. So, yeah, no, I think that would be a big a big addition for Oklahoma. Gabriel's a little bit older, just in terms of, so Dart would have a little bit more eligibility remaining. But yeah, I think it would be very, very interesting, what that quarterback competition would look like should Dart actually make it to Norman.
Appreciate everyone being here, and we will get to your comments and questions. We got a super chat as well. Thank you so much for that. We will get to that comment in just a second. And I want to remind everyone that we're here every Wednesday, typically at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. We would love to get the show sponsored. So that super chat reminds me of that. You can always contribute right here at the Voice of College Football during our show via the super chat, or hit me up at Venmo, PayPal, and Cash App. Just search Mark Rogers TV, and I would love to know that your contribution is toward the Oklahoma show. And also, we're looking for a sponsor. So if you own a small business or know of somebody who does, I can certainly let you know how you can benefit from sponsoring this particular show or the channel in general here at the Voice of College Football. Hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. So the comment on the screen, Jason, by Ryan, is leading into something that we were going to discuss, and that's Caleb Williams. So my thought was pretty standard. I think that once he announced that he was going into the transfer portal from Oklahoma, that USC would be the place. And since Keaton Slovis, their starting quarterback, had hit the transfer portal and left and has since signed with Pitt, that would be fairly automatic. Caleb Williams to USC, and to reunite with the guy that recruited and signed him, and also is considered to be an offensive genius.
It's bizarre, Mark. I don't even more so than Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray and Jalen Hurts. I don't know that I've ever seen a fan base so enamored with one individual. It's kind of bizarre, and I get it, but it's just, I'm in a lot of Facebook groups and group chats on Twitter, and it's almost all discussion about Caleb Williams. So here's where I kind of understand, and I'm with you, specifically when Slovis went to Pitt, and then with Jackson Dart, leaving. It almost made sense that it was inevitable that Caleb Williams was going to sign with, well, not sign, but you know what I mean. Yeah, go move over to USC. So he was in town last weekend for a visit. Met with the coaches. I don't know what in depth that really has to do, because it's the same coaches that he was with from by and large last year or this past year at Oklahoma. But from what I've heard, he came away fairly unimpressed just with USC in general, the facilities, and compared to where Oklahoma is at. Now, having said that, if Caleb Williams decides not to go to USC, that puts Lincoln Riley and USC in an awful situation on the quarterback side of things. So I know that he also visited UCLA. I've heard some noise that potentially Georgia is a little bit back in the mix. I think initially I'd heard that they gave him somewhere of a $2 million NIL evaluation that the family said that wasn't good enough, wasn't what they were looking for specifically. So it's going to be interesting. I've heard North Carolina's in the mix, but the fact that he took a visit to USC and has not committed yet is interesting. I still don't. I still put it at a very, very small chance that he comes back to Oklahoma. I think I would 5% or less at this point. The fact that Oklahoma has had two in Chuba Purdy and Jackson Dart on campus, and additionally the fact that they're going that they've actually offered Arch Manning for the 2023 cycle. I think Oklahoma believes that there's a very small chance that he comes back to Oklahoma as well. At the end of the day, I still think that he probably lands at USC. That's probably the best position for him outside of coming back to Oklahoma, just because of to your point, the familiarity with Riley, his system, being there with a guy that recruited him and brought him on campus. But the fact that he came away unimpressed isn't it certainly isn't a great sign um, for not for Caleb Williams going there, but just for the overall where USC is in the national landscape of things.
USC had one of the quietest seasons of a national power I can ever remember. Like nobody even knew that they were playing, it seemed, most of the time. They had a very uneventful 4-8 season. They were awful. And because of the Pac-12 being in the state that it is, nobody really paid attention to what was going on there. And before I rile anyone up, we'll make a set change here. I don't know that anybody noticed, but
I didn't even notice.
I often am scolded for this, but especially in this case, I would think that would definitely be a no-no. So we got the Sooners front and center instead of somebody else there. All right. There was a comment earlier in the chat concerning the move to the SEC. And now that we've seen, I don't know that the two are connected in any such way, but there was at the time some talk since the playoff proposal was first made public just a few weeks prior to the announcement of the Oklahoma, Texas expansion, that had something to do with not necessarily the decision to expand, but that would play into maybe the move to some extent. And now we are being put on hold concerning the playoff expansion and what that's going to look like. And there's a dissension and non-agreement there. Have you heard anything recently? There was so much talk initially about when is this going to take place? And now we're not hearing that much. At least I'm not.
Yeah, everything, Mark, that I'm hearing kind of points to 2023. Uh, I think the idea with the the teams that the Big 12 was able to bring in for the future. I don't think Oklahoma and Texas. I don't think they want to be part of that. I don't think the Big 12 necessarily wants them to be part of that. I think it was from everything I've heard. I think it's maybe a little bit too soon to get everything together for them to move this year for the 2022 season. But everything that I've heard seems to be focused more on that 2023 season for Oklahoma and Texas to start competition in the SEC. I mean, it could go longer than that, absolutely. There's still some buyout considerations that will have to be made, but I think I would, from like I said, from what I've been hearing and just the landscape of the Big 12 and the SEC in the country, I think it makes sense for that 2023 cycle to happen.
Martin, we appreciate the super chat contribution. Thank you so much for that. Love the show. Keep up the good work, guys. I have to say it is a rebuild. We could not match up with Alabama or Georgia. How long will it take us? A rebuild. That's pretty strong language.
Yeah, Martin, I don't know that I would say that it's a complete rebuild. I think the biggest concern is on the defensive and offensive lines. I think Oklahoma's um, before I say rebuild, I'd like to just see what this product looks like this next year. Um, Now, I think when you look at the national championship game when you watch Alabama and you watch Georgia. Yeah, Oklahoma's not real close from what it seems that the product that they put out this year based on what that looks like. So, I would say Martin, you're maybe a couple 2 or 3 years away from having maybe the same guys that you see on Georgia's defensive line, on Alabama's defensive line. Alabama's not huge, but they've got a couple of really good ones. But you got Georgia, you got Jordan Davis, you've got Wyatt, you've got a bunch of those guys that are really, really strong, really good, a lot of experience, and I think part of it, Martin, is the type of player that Oklahoma's going to have. The type of player that Grinch recruited isn't necessarily what Oklahoma needs going into the SEC, but I think what I'm most interested in is looking to see um, how Schmitty is able to really kind of transform some of those bodies next year and see what that looks like on the defensive line.
Servant is saying that the schedule next year should be interesting. Now, I don't know if he's just alluding to a transition to the SEC and obviously a whole new schedule, which will be fascinating because I'm looking at the 22 schedule and I'm not seeing anything out of the ordinary. Of course, Oklahoma is going to play everybody in the Big 12. And certainly Jason and I have months and months and months and months, and we'll do a full breakdown of the 22 schedule. I know UTEP and Kent State, there are a couple of pesky group of 5 programs that shouldn't give Oklahoma too much problem, but they are on the upswing. And then a trip to Nebraska, which I just looked over Nebraska. The Big Ten did a revision of its schedule, so I just did a Nebraska schedule review. That's going to be Oklahoma's first visit to Lincoln since 2009. And, of course, they won a 23-16 game against the Huskers last year.
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's very similar schedule wise for Oklahoma this year, or this upcoming 2022 season, I should say. You've got obviously 2 very, very winnable games to start off with, and then you've got a Nebraska team that was, I mean, they were so close so many times this year. In typically you see that trajectory when a team is so close. They once they find a way to win 1 or 2 of these close games, then it kind of starts taking off. I love the Casey Thompson addition for Nebraska. I think he's going to be a a much better option than Adrian Martinez. I think they've recruited really well. They've got some good stuff in the portal, so I think that's going to be interesting. But like I said, overall, the Big 12 schedule is good for Oklahoma this year. You've got Oklahoma State coming to Norman, you've got Baylor coming to Norman, you go to Iowa State. But I think the schedule sets up pretty well for them as well this year. I mean, obviously it was good for them this past year, and it didn't come to fruition. But I think whether you call this a reload, a rebuild, where Oklahoma's at, I don't think that we know. And that's what's. I mean, I'm going to go off on a little sidebar here. These way too early top 25 predictions. It's so. And I mean, they've done these, these are out there historically, but it almost makes no sense to do it before the spring games even happen, because there's so much movement now, more so than they ever were before. But because I've seen Oklahoma top 10, and I've seen some of them at the bottom of the top 25. You just don't know what this roster is going to look like, come March, April timeframe. So yeah, we'll get into that, but it looks like, and I think it'll be an exciting game for the fans. Nebraska was, it was this past year, and then it'll be, you'll have more of the excitement on the Nebraska side, getting to host Oklahoma for this year. But like I said, whether you look at this as a rebuild, a reload, where Oklahoma's at different positions, I think they still, based on the schedule, will have a good chance to compete for the Big 12 championship again.
The one aspect of the schedule that I find interesting, I don't agree with it. I don't know if there's an explanation for it. The Oklahoma State game is not the last game of the season. It's at Texas Tech. Oklahoma State is the second to last game of the season.
Yeah, that is strange. I don't know why that is, and certainly there's time if they wanted to readjust that they could. But yeah, it's traditionally been almost every year here over the last 10, 15 years that game has been the last game of the season. So yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard any reasons or recommendations on why that was the case, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised to see that move because it makes more sense to be the last game of the year. The only thing that I would say is unless you're in a situation where you want to try to maybe avoid playing the same team in back-to-back weeks, if
Yeah.
that's the only thought that I could think of.
That's the same thought I had, which is sending a message to Texas Tech that we do not expect you to play in the Big 12 championship game.
Right. Well, that could very well be the case as well, for sure.
Let's see. Yes, the chat is full of Caleb Williams talk and a few people chiming in that they're sick of Caleb Williams and want Oklahoma talk, and I can certainly understand that.
Yeah, I mean, and there was some talk on here about evaluation, and I think I think the evaluation of quarterbacks, and I think that will be interesting going forward as a guy that has done a really good job at not only evaluating quarterbacks but has done a good job of building those guys is Jeff Lebby, and I think the fact that he's getting some of these quarterbacks. Arch Manning has a really good relationship with Lebby, and that's part of the reason why Oklahoma has offered him. He's got a good relationship with some of these guys that Oklahoma has brought in. Jackson Dart, Chuba Purdy is a couple of guys. Obviously, he had a really good relationship with Dylan Gabriel, and it was almost a no, kind of a no questions asked, in terms of we got a spot for you. Do you want to come? So I think, I think that moving forward will be interesting to see what that looks like, especially as Oklahoma gets some of these young kids in, to see how they develop within the system within Jeff Lebby's system, because it is a system that has consistently um, produced just astronomical numbers across the college football landscape, whether it be at Baylor where he was there, UCF, Ole Miss for the last couple of years, and you would certainly expect that it would not be much different at Oklahoma.
Weston is looking at the defensive line battle with Jordan Kelly and Isaiah Coe. Coe, especially, was a huge recruit.
Mhm.
Have to fight for a starting spot, bringing in some good defensive linemen.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's the goal within this transfer portal, right? I don't think they're trying to necessarily eliminate anyone, but really just bring more of um, a competition side. And I think one of the things that I had heard when Venables came in was that he had a very established plan in place, what he thought needed to happen to get Oklahoma to the next level, to win a national championship. Not only that, but obviously be able to compete week in and week out on the deep on the in the SEC. So I think part of that is bringing in an infusion of talent on the offense and defensive lines, and you've seen that. Excuse me, you've seen that already, Mark, with the Hawaii transfer that's that has that come over from Hawaii to Oklahoma. I believe his name is Jonah Laulau. I'm certain I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but 6'7", 280. So he's a really good kid. Had tons of offers as well, and like I said, there's about 3 or 4 defensive linemen that Oklahoma's in on here in the transfer side, at least that we're just visiting this week. So yeah, I think it's very apparent that Venables and the staff feels the need to get an infusion of talent on the defensive line as well as the offensive line as well.
Zach is telling us that Colin Cowherd, as I believe his name, is nothing more than, oh, that's not the question. That is a response to, yes, Wes, who says, what do you guys think about the Colin Cowherd? What he had to say about OU coach and that it's a bad hire. I did not hear those comments, and I'm looking for them right here, and I don't see anything online. I don't know if you caught anything.
So I would, so for, I would take anything that Colin Cowherd says with a grain of salt. He
Yes, a large dose of salt.
large dose of salt. Number one, you have to understand he is a big USC guy, right? So he was thrilled to death with Lincoln Riley coming to USC. So I think that part of it has to do with it. And yeah, he's mentioned that about not about Venables not being as big of a hire as Lincoln Riley was. So yeah, like I said, don't put any I don't put any stock into anything Coward says. And if you ever listen to him, he goes live with Joel Klatt from time to time, and it's kind of entertaining to see them two go back and forth because you know that you can tell. I mean, obviously they both work for the same station, but Joel Klatt doesn't really, I mean, take anything that he has at face value either. So yeah, I don't put much stock into that. I'm as maybe even me personally, maybe even more excited about the hire now than I was when it happened. I thought he was the perfect guy for Oklahoma. Have just been incredibly excited about the staff that he's put together. I think he's made every right move, and I think from what I've heard that they're going to bring in somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 25 off-field staff to kind of help in a lot of those. And just so I think most of the people know this, but the coaches, there's a certain period where these on-field staff members can't have any contact or coach or do anything with some of these kids, but these off-field guys, they're the coaches when the coaches aren't allowed to be around these kids. So it's really important that you have a good analyst staff. It's really important that you have a really good off-field staff, and I think Oklahoma's built that. Obviously, things will come spring practice and then the fall, but I think Oklahoma fans should be thrilled with everything that Venables has done up to this point.
The other thing about some of these national hosts is that first and foremost, they can't know everything. They can't be informed on everything. So Colin Cowherd spends most of his time talking about the NFL and the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
So not that he doesn't like college football, doesn't have a right to have an opinion, doesn't have any insight into it, but he just can't be expected. I liken that to Stephen A. Smith,
Yeah.
who he's an NBA guy first and foremost. I even hear him make ignorant comments about the NFL where he obviously doesn't know what he's talking about, and he's an NBA guy, but he's on a show and on a series of shows. I believe he still has a radio show, and so he's just going from show to show to show and trying to gobble up as much information as possible to keep himself informed. And it's really a difficult task to be that knowledgeable about everything. I just focus on college football and I can't stay up with everything. So when you're commenting about the NFL for 2 segments and then the NBA and then the NBA and then some kind of boxing thing and then something else, and then all of a sudden you're asked about college football, then the response is many times generic out of him. But Colin Cowherd, yeah, he seems every time I've heard him speak on college football, it's fairly knowledgeable, but he can only know so much. And again, he's covering everything. So yeah, he and Joel Klatt have some good conversations. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
I've got as much respect for Joel Klatt as just about anybody around.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think he makes some of the comments that he makes just to get a rise out of people and just
Yeah.
to He'll
That's
bring
the other thing.
viewership to his shows and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean it is what it is. But you gotta understand that he's such a big USC guy, so he's gonna. I mean, that's obviously the way he's gonna go with it.
All right, folks, we appreciate you being here each and every, typically on a Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. That's one of the reasons why we would like for you to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for the notifications to know when we go live, because from time to time we've got to move the schedules around, and we're glad that Jason's at least healthy enough to give us a go here on Friday. So we appreciate him being here. And is there anything else on your mind, Jason, that you wanted to bring to the forefront? I don't see anything in the live chat.
No, there's not a whole lot. I think obviously next week when we talk, I think things will be a little bit more clear in some of these transfer for guys. And Oklahoma's going to continue to be very, very aggressive on the transfer portal side. I mean, partly because they are a little bit behind the eight ball from a 2022 recruiting cycle standpoint, but I think they see the need to infuse this team with talent, and I think also because of the fact that they've had so much attrition, both through outgoing transfers and kids that have left early for the draft as well. I think, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the as we get closer, we can talk a little bit more about some of the guys in the late signing period that Oklahoma's in on, and see where Oklahoma kind of ranks as far as some of those guys go.
Yeah, we were just about 3 weeks away from the second National Signing Day, the first Wednesday of February. And so we will see those commits and signees and evaluate them. And certainly these 9 potential transfers that are visiting campus here in the next several days, we will continue to monitor that. And who knows what else is going to happen as college football gets new news each and every day concerning player movement in the transfer portal. And again, these recruiting classes are being completed here in the next few weeks as well. So much to talk about. So join us back here next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. Jason, great to see you. Great to have you here. Glad that you're feeling better. And we hope to see you next week.
All right. Sounds good, Mark. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. And once again, if you've got a connection to anyone that might be interested in sponsoring us, or you yourself and your small business sponsoring us here at the Voice of College Football, please hit me up at MarkRogersTV at Gmail. Appreciate everybody being here, and we will see you soon.